Today's discussion, we are going to be talking about incentivising D&I goals. The reason why we wanted to run a signatory forum about this is that we know diversity and inclusion metrics are becoming increasingly influential in business decisions. We know that whether or not a company wins an RFP, whether or not you secure investment, those decisions are now starting to factor in diversity and inclusion considerations. We're getting increasing visibility over things like the gender pay gap, and D&I is now coming up a lot more frequently in senior rooms, in boardrooms, in leadership conversations. So I'm really thrilled that we're going to be hearing from a really experienced tech professional who has years of experience, not only in leading agile, multidisciplinary tech teams, sorts of teams and people that many of our organisations will have in our employee base. She was a head of design, and she's also made a really fascinating career switch to being a director of people and culture and leading a UK tech product consultancy. So I would love to ask you first, Sari, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you, Lexi, and thank you for inviting me to talk in this forum. So my name is Sari Griffiths, pronouns she and her. And as Lexi explained, I've arrived at people and culture through quite a squiggly career route. I started off in graphic design, especially in branding, and then moved on to more digital side, user experience and interface design, even had a little stint as a software engineer, and then becoming a leader in the design space before moving on to people and culture. When I kind of started off in design, I was really interested in how to communicate ideas and concepts through non-verbal ways. For example, so how can we communicate brand values through visuals, interactions, experiences, and behaviors? And as time went by, and as I was focusing more on managing teams and stakeholders and business, I became more and more aware that these behaviors won't just happen by telling them how to behave, which is quite familiar to most of you, I'm sure. And I was really interested in how to create the right policies and processes to encourage these behaviors to emerge on its own accord. And I found this area really fascinating. So I was given the opportunity to join the people and culture team, to evolve the team to be ready for growth in the same workplace. So I decided to take the challenge and make a switch. And drawing on my experience and skill sets from the previous work, I helped the people and culture team to adopt lean agile kind of project management methodology, and introducing new data collection and reporting, and adding new platforms, bringing in service design and product management principles to help the team to get ready for the more efficient and professional kind of internal services. And in 2020, following the George Floyd and Black Lives Matter protests, like many companies, we started to think a bit more deeply about our D&I strategy, and started working on around the D&I issues. And the following year, we agreed on quite ambitious D&I goals, which was to echo the gender and ethnic diversity of London within 3 years, and have equal engagement scores for all cohorts regarding gender and ethnicity. And we were fully aware that in order to achieve this, we really had to influence people's behavior in quite a lot of places. The incentivization as a topic has been considered, while you're working on your own D&I strategy, I'm sure. And I thought it would be important to share how we approached it, and with this tech talent charter community, so that we can kind of collectively make a progress in the tech industry. And I just wanted to give you context. So while I'm no longer in this organization, but while I was there and working on this project, we had about 120 people, and staff turnover was around the average of London tech industry. So it's around 20%, I believe.
Thank you, Sari. That's really, really helpful in terms of the context of your journey. And I would love for us to kind of lean into the design thinking from a tech point of view, like how does an engineer or a designer think about solving problems that traditionally sit in an HR and a people function? So that's a really interesting narrative that I'd love us to draw out a little later. So let's start, I guess, with the story of, as Director of People and Culture then, how did you go about deciding, firstly, what your D&I goals were going to specifically be once you've broken down the idea that you wanted to have the same demographic of London, which is where your organisation was based. So you've got these kind of goals. What went into those decisions about choosing what to focus on and what those measures should be? How do you come up with those numbers? A lot of companies sometimes, feel the kind of the blank text editor fear that a lot of software engineers will get when you look at a blank text editor and go, where do we start? So why did you make those decisions? What else went into them? And were there other goals that you picked?
Yeah, so I suppose the first thing we decided on was between me and CEO, we made agreement that let's focus on gender and ethnicity. Gender, that was already a subject that we close to our heart. We were really pushing for that before. And ethnicity, obviously, that was what kicked off the whole process in 2020. So, and as a company, we're very, the way we approach things is very lean and agile. So in our mindset went straight to, let's start small and let's focus on the small things and then make sure that how we understand how the strategy is working and how we can measure it. And once we crack that ways how we can tackle this problem, the plan was to expand it to include all the other diversity characteristics, which was all the protected characteristics plus social mobility. That was the plan. In terms of a goal, that we wanted it to be really ambitious, but something that our employees can feel that was the right things to do, kind of emotionally right, not just kind of commercially right. So we were based in London. And so it was, within the company, there's always a conversation about how we can support our local community. We were very much aware that we were in the middle of East London, where all the there's a social mobility issue everywhere, and there's a very mixed community.
You were talking about choosing those goals with that really localized angle, because you raise that point, choosing diversity and inclusion goals. It's great that we can focus on that with that kind of commercial head point of view, but there's also this kind of this other approach here, which is about like a social heart and a commercial head, and you need to bring both of those lenses to deciding what those goals are. So you may very well be starting by looking at something like a gender pay gap or a business case, but actually how do your employees feel about the goals that you're choosing and how you might go about enacting them? And that's a key thing that you have to consider from a foundational level if you're going to start really driving D&I goals through your company. But I'd love to ask a follow-up on that, which is, I know you're a 120 person company and TTC signatories range from huge enterprise to micro, really tiny organizations. How do you go about understanding the sentiment of your employees? How do you work out what they care about and make sure that you're hearing from everyone and not necessarily people who are the most vocal only?
So with this one, we've actually, following the 2020, all the protests going on, what we did was to have a consultation, a drop-in session. Anybody can turn up, and the very safe space. People can say anything, and just to air the view that what they feel, how they're affected by these events, and what they feel that what we can do as a company. And we ran this sessions about 4 sessions in a different time, and each time it was very well attended, and everybody, all the different levels turn up. Not everybody spoke in the meeting, but it was really powerful to hear what individuals thought of what's going on in the world and what they wanted to do about it. And also we have employee engagement platform, and that has an opportunity. So it runs every 2 weeks, and that was capturing more anonymous. It's anonymous completely, but we get the comments from different around the company, like how they feel that we're not, and within that, there's definitely a theme that we're not representing our community, that we should be supporting more.
Right, so it's really interesting. You've got these two threads of listening activities that can translate out probably to quite a lot of different contexts. It's really interesting to hear that your engagement survey, and that engagement listening activity is happening every 2 weeks. I think a lot of organisations wouldn't necessarily be running things that frequently, or wouldn't realise that running things that frequently is something that other companies do, and that's really great to hear. But then also you've got these kind of more in-person single opportunity events where people can go and be in the real world rather than filling out a form to share what they think. A really interesting kind of like a dual approach of different styles. So let's jump into the nitty gritty of it then. How do you go about getting your team to then deliver on these goals?
Right, so we have made a couple of focus points. One was recruitment and the other part was progression. We landed this area through the survey, basically. So we've done and data collection. We collected all the ethnicity data. So we had gender data already, but we didn't have ethnicity data. So we collected those, and we really cross-referenced it with all the HR information that we have, and using it on the employee engagement platform. So that would give us all the kind of mixed opportunity to analyze the data through the gender and ethnicity lens. And recruitment, that was basically, we realized that the gender balance of the new recruits in the last 3 years was going down, and that's not great. We didn't have ethnicity data because we only just collected, but we had a gender data to go back for 3 years, so that really helped. And with the progression, it was interesting one. So there was a comments, so through this employee engagement platform, saying, well, we feel that more women and ethnic minorities spend time on bench, which is our word for somebody in between the projects. And we wanted to make, we wanted to test whether that was true. So we overlay the data with all the allocation and how long people spend on the bench. And on the face of it, that was true. So, what we came out showed that was true. But then we added the lens of seniority, and what turned out was it's actually completely based on the seniority. If you're more senior, you spend less time on a bench, but if you're more junior, you spend there longer. But because the junior cohorts are more diverse, when you look at it as a whole, there's definitely a systemic problem. So that in turn basically make us think, okay, so how can we move this more diverse cohort to become more senior? And how can we make sure that these the more junior stuff spending more time on bench, which is not great for the progression, to be put on a project quicker, have more opportunity to progress. So that really made a focus on, where the data gave us a focus, and rather than just saying, oh no, there is some, and there's something wrong here, you need to support the gender, but it's really, okay, well, we need to support the gender and ethnicity, but through making sure that the progression is enabled for this cohort.
Yeah, it's really interesting. That's that kind of product manager approach, isn't it, that you see in tech teams of validate your assumptions. Are your assumptions about what you're trying to achieve correct? And actually, do you have data that instead identifies a different problem or a deeper version of the problem than one you thought you had? So you've now got this question about, it's not necessarily, obviously recruitment is a big part of it, but there's this question about progression. And that's something that at Tech Talent Charter, we are hearing more and more companies talking about now is, and it's probably sharpened, I would imagine, by things like the gender pay gap, reporting, this idea of progression and how do you move people successfully and fairly through a business to, that matches quite a different variety of different life experiences and stages that different groups will go through. Yeah. So I guess you've identified these things that are happening. I think, so you've mentioned recruitment and you've mentioned progression. Was there anything else as well that stuck out from your investigation around it that you then realised, oh, I've got to try and get certain people to fix these different types of problems?
Yeah, so as a part of the progression, we also noticed that the line management was, just got, well, we lay the characteristics with the seniority, and also checked how the line managements are representing each cohort. And obviously, more senior you go is less diverse, and that kind of captured in the line management. So that was one of the concerns, and how can we make sure the line management understands in the lack of diversity within themselves to to do some of the maybe unconscious bias training, and with knowing that, okay, we are lacking in diversity amongst the line management, so how can we make the situation a bit better for the more minority cohorts? And the other point was to make all of the policies and processes more inclusive. That was mainly for the people team to do. But
yes,
it's like underlying, just making sure that all our language are inclusive, and we're considering all the situations that this maybe make more parent friendly for those caregivers. How are we catering for these people? And that was one of the things to consider. And obviously data collection and reporting. So it's good putting all these things in place. If you can't see any improvement, or which intervention doing what, we can't improve it. So putting all whatever the data collection point that we needed in place, that was quite important.
Right. So as director of people and culture, I'm hearing that you audited your processes, you were looking at what data you were collecting. There was a big focus on understanding, are we collecting the right information? Is this information helpful? Is it accurate? You also identified people within the structure of the organisation that you are going to need to sort of enlist as champions or participants in this process of change. So you've got these line managers that you've identified play a key role here. So you've taken care of all the process stuff. How do you then start working through people in the team? How do you start incentivizing them to conduct themselves in a way that's aligned with the value of this? Because as soon as you start putting metrics onto things, one thing that I know we hear is how do you get people to do that when they're time poor, they've got other deliverables they've got to meet? So what did the incentivization of these goals then look like at the line manager level?
So for line managers, what we focused on is, rather than adding anything new, improving what they already do. So how, just take a look at the process of maybe the goal setting, or when you're talking one-to-one, what can you do differently? What can you do differently? What can you improve to make sure that you're catering for you're making your activity more inclusive? And what do you need to think about? But these are all they're already doing it, but you just you're improving the way that they do things, but making it really clear also that this is not negotiable. This is not nice to have. This is part of your actual job, and we will be we will create the space for you to do this. So you have to you will get assessed at the end of it, whether you're adopting this or not. And so I think it was really important that this is not an addition. This is what you already do, but in a different version.
That's really interesting, because we often hear of D&I being added on as it's a bolt-on new thing that you have to do. It's a new program of activity, and new can be really great for drawing people's attention to your business doing something. And I think a lot of we hear sometimes from speaking to different HR and people managers that they're really excited to say, oh, we've got this new program and it's going to be really impactful, and they like to position things that way. But actually, sometimes that can do a disservice to what you're trying to achieve when working through others. So what you've described there about the idea of, no, this is just part of your job, and if you're not doing it, then you're not really doing the job of what a line manager should be doing. It's quite an interesting, quite a sassy narrative as well to have to put out to your staff. I mean, how did those conversations go? How did you position them in a way that they were received well, without defensiveness? How do you go about doing that, perhaps if you haven't positioned things that way before?
Yeah, I suppose it's the overall buy-in for the narrative was high. Everybody wanted to do something. So, because the company goal was quite a big goal, and it's for everybody. So we all want to play a part in making the company more diverse in 3 years. And there was quite strong buy-in from that. So it was good that they can see how they can contribute to this goal. And we did, when we first set the goal, we definitely did the spiel of actually more diverse teams are, more profitable, more efficient, you get more ideas, and it's a great, better team to work with. And that idea was definitely being bought. Everybody was signed up to it. So that having that background definitely helped. It was luckily there was less cynical to this what we're trying to achieve. So I don't know whether that's helpful.
Yeah, it does. It definitely resonates with something that I've heard as well, because I was speaking to a consultant who is doing some work for a very large organisation about this, and she just describes what you just said there, that idea of you can have individuals that are really bought into this and or are bought into the business case, or can be brought round to the business case, but sometimes you also meet people who, for sometimes very legitimate reasons, are quite cynical. And that's where that comes back to that listening activity of really understanding what potentially people who are not going to speak up, what they think and feel, because sometimes the way to bringing those people along is a lot to do with listening and a lot to do with helping them understand that they are also not excluded from D&I practice. So D&I practice helps everyone. It's that kind of idea that everyone can be part of this, because it's part of everyone's jobs, not a bolt-on for the people who it's, for want of a better term, being done to, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess you've mentioned here financial incentives. You've talked about the fact that you had team goals about this. Let's talk about money. How did money factor into these conversations about hiring, recruitment, performance? How do you square that circle?
So we were quite unique in a way that we'd never had a financial incentive before. So that was quite new things. And the first financial incentive we brought in for the senior leadership team had a 40% portion that was dedicated to D&I goal. And it's not, we didn't want people to game the system. So the goal is for everybody. And if everybody hits the goal, everybody gets the payout. So it's quite, I don't know, socialist probably system. And the main reason was that, obviously we didn't want some people to do things in the wrong reason, but also give people a different way to contribute to the number. So not every senior stakeholders have the open roles, so you might not be able to achieve it that way. But by having a collective goal, some might go out and then make sure that inclusion piece was progressed rather than hiring. So and also because it's collective, in a way that each other will keep an eye on each other and make sure that we keep each other honest, that you are putting your weighting, because if you don't, then people will notice and then say, well, look, you should be doing something a little bit more. So it's a bit of a internal checking system inbuilt. It definitely did galvanize the mind, and especially the recruitment team, interestingly. So they also had the same goal, and they didn't have a separate goal. So they have to contribute to having the actual headcounts in the business doing a good job, rather than putting a certain number onto the pipeline. So that really helped them to focus on the quality of the people candidates that they find rather than just concentrating on the number.
So can we just recap the goal structure a little bit here then? So the leadership team had a bonus system that essentially had 40% of that weighted to the diversity and inclusion goal. So did you meet X% of employees are reflective of whatever criteria it was, so a certain characteristic?
Yeah, so it was percentage. So at the end of 1 year, the gender balance should be this percentage, and I can't remember exactly. So it was in the 3 years, so it was built up of on the way to 50-50. I think we started somewhere 30-70, so like somewhere between that number for the end of the first year, and the same goes for ethnicity. So if we hit the first year goal, and then that part of the bonus will be paid, and there will be some sort of again, the percentage. So if you hit the full number, you get full payout, but there will be some reduction in number as there is a range that you need to hit rather than that the top number.
Okay, that's super interesting. I'd love to just ask about the recruitment team then, because I think you mentioned earlier they didn't have the same goal. It was different. So could you just explain again how your recruiters, how were they incentivized in context of this?
Right. So they don't, as a team, they don't have the financial incentive, but their goal was to contribute to the company goal. The directors of the recruitment was a part of this senior leadership team, so he was very motivated in the same way. But the recruitment teams, their main focus was to bring in a very qualified candidates at the top of the pipeline, because when we actually had a head start on the recruitment side, because we were already looking at a new system, tracking the diversity characteristics of all the candidates before everything kicked off. So we were in a good place when we wanted to get the data to see whether we had a couple of hypotheses before when we started. One was hiring a diverse candidate will take longer, and the other one is if you have a better pipeline at the top of the funnel, diversity, that will translate to hiring. So those are two, if that makes sense. Those are two hypotheses that we had.
Did you find they were true? Did you find that they were true then when you cascaded down? Did you find that they actually translated into better diversity? Like your 50-50 panel, for example?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, it did. We had to, so we're trying to get the exact data for the candidates' diversity information, but it was really hard to collect because, it's anything between 30 to 70% response rate, depending on the role. HR roles usually have a better response than the engineering role, but it's still like 70%. It's not quite enough for us to know the proper picture. So we slightly controversially went on to rely on AI and just signed up to this platform, which will give us their guess, the AI's best guess of gender or ethnic diversity or balance of the candidates. It's completely anonymous. We wouldn't be able to break it down or anything. So the only thing we can do is aggregated data on each stages for each role. And that helped us to actually see whether having a qualified candidates, more balanced pipeline at the top of the funnel, if that translates into a hire. And we can see that after 3 or 4 months, we can see that they actually match. If you have 60-40 in favor of women, we'll hire 60-40 in favor of women at the hiring point. So it will get almost reflected on there during the process. And the other things that was helpful for us was to know that each stage of the interview process or this hiring process, we can see that there is no disproportionate drop in certain characteristics. So that it doesn't prove that our process is great, but it meant that it wasn't on fire. So we could kind of we know the way to focus on when the focus was at the top of the funnel rather than the actual recruitment process in the middle.
That is absolutely fascinating what you were saying, Sari, about using a tool to predict what the gap in your data for your hiring funnel looks like. What's it called, if you don't mind sharing?
It's called GEM.
GEM. Okay, so you use that to kind of bridge the gap for what, you had this data black hole where you didn't have the information and you had no idea whether that gap in information was leaning towards certain characteristics because there was a causal reason that data was missing because of a certain characteristic or set of experiences. And so you've used GEM to try and fill that gap, obviously very cautiously, because AI is still developing as a product. But it's fascinating to hear how these things can potentially help us contextualize, if used carefully, what the situation is. And it sounds like obviously you were able to see not see a drop off at the very least. So you've closed that data gap a little somehow through using that type of tool. That's fascinating. So I guess we talked about bonuses quite a bit here. I'd love to bring up the topic of friend referrals, because I know it's something that comes up an awful lot. You haven't mentioned using it. If you didn't, why? Did people have feelings about it? Because I know a lot of companies do use friend referrals, and they are very successful at being a route for bringing new talent into the business. So how do you kind of weave the friend referral conversation into your decision making around how to incentivize this?
Yeah, so we have friends referral system. It wasn't the D&I. It was in place way before D&I activity, so it was always there. There was a conversation that whether to double the referral fee if the candidates were of a minority, and we did. I think the CEO was quite keen on it. We had a bit of research, and we see that some companies tried it and works in a way. But we basically reached out to our employees to talk how they feel about the system, and there was quite a strong sentiment from the employees. I mean, they're probably including myself, that it's less of its effectiveness as a incentive, but more that if somebody joined using the system and found out that they were paid more because they're women, because they're ethnic minority, it is a little bit, they'll feel slightly less good about that they're being accepted, because somehow they feel a bit less worthy of being there. So I think that was the concern, and what we instead decided to do was to basically encourage people and say, look, this is our goal. If you have any friends and that you want to recommend who are in this category, just jog in memory, think about them more and then bring them forward. So it's more, we basically ask them to reach out to the network rather than saying we'll pay you more. And that worked, to be honest, that worked better.
That is so interesting to hear, because I know a lot of organisations do use this financial incentive piece, and a lot will be asking that same question of you, which is that if we have a business goal, why don't we incentivise it with money? And it's that thing that we were talking about before, this idea of like commercial head, sensitive heart. And I hear from talking to a lot of tech hiring managers and folks working in the tech talent pipeline, the phrase that comes up with candidates over and over again is, I hope to God I'm not a diversity hire. Like that's that sentiment of, it's doing the same amount of damage from a very different route by putting someone into that position where they're being hired because of their characteristics rather than because of their ability to do the job and their values aside from their their skin or their gender or whatever it is. And it's such an interesting one, because the folks who who are quite critical sometimes of diversity and inclusion discourse, this is a concern area that a lot of them will raise, is this idea of we're just hiring people to meet a diversity quota rather than hiring, this is the phrase that comes up, the right person for the job. So I would love to ask you this question now, like, how do we translate diversity and inclusion strategy between the D&I and people leaders like you who are making these decisions and incentivizing these D&I goals? How do you translate them to the tech hiring managers that are tight for time, probably don't want to be on the interview, stressed to be on the call because they've got a lot of work to do, you know, the tech teams who are desperate to get on with what's in their sprint and are pulled into meetings, you know, when they're thinking, oh, you know, I don't have time for this, is, you know, why are we doing this? How do you get past that attitude that they might have, that they're very time poor and that they just want you to hire the right person for the job?
Yeah.
How did you approach that?
So I think, well, the way we gone about it was, again, lean really back on like data, and also, you know, they are all just, although they wanted that, you know, right person, they also very strongly agree that if these people are equally skilled, you know, and then having an unfair advantage of coming into the level playing field, they should be helped, right? So they're not against having a diversity coming into the business, but they're against the idea that somehow they have to lower the bar, or, you know, they have to take longer time. So the starting point is to agree with them. So, right, what we want to do is give people a fair chance. For everybody who can do the job, fair chance, and we want to find them. You know, that's all we're trying to do. So I guess, like, we'll agree between ourselves. Like, we're trying to do the same thing. We're trying to hire right people, but by giving everybody a fair chance. So that's quite important to agree on at the beginning. And so the 2 points that it takes longer, and also they're not as good. So these 2 points, with takes longer, we did actually did an experiment for probably about 3 months by flagging certain roles as urgent. And in these roles, we're not going to wait at the last minute to have a diverse finalists list. We'll go straight in, whoever comes first, who are the most appropriate person to take the job, who can do the job, they'll get one. And we run this alongside the effort to improve our top of the funnel. And what was interesting is after 3 months or so, it turned out having this urgent flag and hiring the first person didn't really change any diversity. If anything, actually, it had a better diversity balance than the other route. And we ended up doing almost exactly the same thing and almost exactly the same speed. So, you know, by collecting the data and by following up what's happened, we all kind of agree that urgent label is a bit redundant. It's more, you know, by the effort of having a more diverse pipeline, it actually can remove that the speed problem that, you know, it wasn't an issue. Actually, it was just needed to have a good pipeline mechanism at the top. And the second one, if we need to drop the bar, what we did was that when we kick off the project, so we use a scorecard during the interview process and on the hiring process. And when we kick off, we really interrogated the scorecards and then made sure that each requirement were about a skill sets and they were about the really must-have skill sets. So things like you hear often that you have to have a 5 years experience in consulting, and that's a proxy for something else. You know, by being at the consultants for 5 years, what is your assumption that this person have? And then that's the bits that you need to write down in your scorecard. So do you have, say, stakeholder management skills, or do you understand the complex system, or, you know, whatever that 5 year experience is shorthand for? we will try to pick that up and then write it down on the scorecard. And it really helped for interviewers as well, because they know that exactly what they're asking for when you say 5 years consulting experience. So, you know, that's quite arbitrary. So, you ignore that, you really focus on the actual skill sets that you need. And when you listen this one up and you kind of question, is any of those, can they learn after they joined? You know, it is which one of these are the must-have, the showstopper, that they come in a day one, they have to be able to do this. And you just really being tight with our shopping list and just what's the minimum we can have. And once we really agree on that and agreed with the hiring manager, yes, this is the person, minimum requirement for the person that we need. And then it becomes a lot easier afterwards to say, when it comes to the, you know, we have a meeting called Wash Up right at the end, when we have a few people in the last round to discuss who to hire. You know, we already know that these people are there because they scored high in a very well thought through, you know, everybody agreed scorecard. So, you know, there's no discussion around we lower the bar, because that happened at the beginning, that we agreed that that's not lowering the bar, that's the bar. That you know, you won't move, you know, this is set in the right place. So before we had this discussion at the scorecard point level, the wash up meeting was really hilarious, because it was very, very like politically correct meeting you can never have in there, you know, questioning that. But I think through that experience we learned, okay, having a good agreement right at the beginning is really critical to make sure that everybody agrees that these people are of quality and they're bringing in different things. And then what we can question ourselves is, okay, so what the additional things all these people bring, what is the most important? And, you know, the few things that we said was, you know, are they a value fit? So not cultural fit, but they fit with our values. And are they cultural add? So, you know, are we hiring somebody like ourselves again, or are we hiring somebody to increase our collective ability? So, and then, you know, with that conversation, we often go for, okay, well, we want to add our ability. And if that is the white British man, that's fine. And you know, that was not at that point. Whoever we agreed that was the best fit will go in.
Yeah. So there's this thing about like get your standards defined up front. Be clear that, you know, you're not inviting unintended consequences of a loose process that can then create problems for how you try and sort of drive forward your diversity and inclusion practice. So we've reached time on the call. So I'm going to ask you for your final thoughts on this, Sari. Top 3 things on what people leaders need to be doing to getting incentivizing of D&I goals right, in a nutshell.
Oh, right. Right. So that's one thing I didn't quite prepare, but I think first thing is definitely data.
Yeah.
You have to have a data, you have to measure it, and you have to make it transparent. Share always, because that's, you know, if you don't share it, people think so you're hiding something as well. But you know, if you can see the things happening, it's really good incentive. That gives you a motivation. Okay, this is working, I'm going to get going. And you can pick up if there is any unintended consequences. You should be able to pick up by looking at this data as well. So it's really, really important. Second things, I think, is an alignment. So like when we start, be really clear on what you're trying to achieve and how you're trying to achieve it, and this is the outcome you want, and make sure that people sign up to it. There's an opportunity for them to give you an opinion, make an improvement, and have some sort of a system for them to talk to you to address any of the concern that they have. But alignment's really, I think, is a key. And with alignment, you can enable the third one, is the autonomy, that having really clear goals and alignment will make it a lot easier for people to go about their business to achieve the same goal in their way, in their own way, without us policing every single aspects of it. I think that incentivizing by giving a senior leadership team quite a big goal, one of the good things was that they almost became a part of the people and culture team, and trying to, you know, help us, and trying to really think really hard how they can influence that the goal within their capacity. And so that's kind of giving a place for people to autonomously help you will really, you know, it is really great for the people and culture team, because we, you know, quite often we don't have enough capacity to do everything or, you know, control everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that. That's a great point to end on, because it's something that we hear engineers say so often, isn't it? Is you hire smart people and you throw a problem at them and let them solve it. And it's applying that engineering thinking to a very D&I and people focused problem. So Sari, thank you so much for taking your time to just come in with all of these experiences that you've had and share them with us on the Signatory Forum. We're really, really grateful for everyone who joined on the call today. We're going to be uploading this to our YouTube channel so that it can be shared in our open playbook as well. If you've got any ideas or questions around incentivizing D&I goals, please get in touch with us. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you've got any other ideas that we can be adding to it. And thank you so much, folks, for your time.